Oh, good morning, everyone. Sorry for there's a little bit of delay there. Literally, as I was sitting down to launch this morning's Facebook Live, my neighbor started using his leaf blower. And so I had to go close all the windows so it wouldn't get out of control in here. Welcome. Give you all a chance to kind of log in this morning and get connected. Just a kind of a note for those of you who have been following our Facebook Live using the connection to my personal Facebook account. This is the last week. We're going to host it on my personal account in the weeks that follow. We finally figured out how to upload these to the OSLC Facebook account. So that was a milestone for us. So we just figured it out this week. So next week, we'll give you different information on how to log into Facebook Live. And then all of our Facebook Live events will be channeled through the OSLC, the Our Savior's Lutheran Church Facebook account. So just a heads up on that. I'll make a reference to that at the announcement time as well. But for those of you who have kind of figured out a way to dial this in, it's all going to change next week. So a little bit of advanced warning about that as you get ready for next week. Always delighted to kind of encourage all of you as you log on as a reminder that while it's me doing most of the talking and you, of course, chatting with each other and using emoticons to respond to the morning, this really is an attempt to try to not replicate, but provide a moment of sort of solidarity with others. Whether you're in the live event this morning or whether you log on later, to just have this sense that you're not alone as you journey with your, with your focus on soul and spirit and neighbor and world. You're not alone. You're connected to communities, even though we're physically distanced from each other. We can still be connected in meaningful ways. And this is just one way to do that. So, just an encouragement to keep a tether to neighbor, whether it be someone you know from our faith community or just people who connect to this space and try to be present for 30 minutes together. Or because I always ramble on, sometimes it's 40 minutes, to feel like you're connected, connected to each other, connected to some little wisdom for the day, for the week, for the way forward, and connected to this really unprecedented situation that we share as a planet, to be confronted with a pandemic that has us, in a pause mode long enough to maybe reshape or reimagine who we can be personally and who we might be as a wider collective community together. So amazing times in some sense to be together to think through all this. Before I get going this morning, I've decided to do another thought piece today. So this is a kind of a raw piece of material today. I think I haven't thought it all the way through, but I want to share it with you today. I've been spending, most of my life thinking about this stuff, how spirituality and religion and world all kind of collaborate together. And so I put on my butterfly shirt because this is sort of a cocooning of an idea of how we might maybe reimagine the role of religion for our time, given our circumstances. And, why not think big about what might be possible? So I want to do that with you today. To kind of get us situated, I think this week in particular, there was two anniversaries that marked two pieces of legislation. And many of us obviously were keenly aware of one in particular because of the loss of John Lewis, but it's also the 30th anniversary of the passing of the American Disabilities Act. And both of those pieces of legislation were just such strong testimonies to the way in which we can reconstruct society or lean into the collective human experience in ways that invite full participation by everyone within the community, right? Of course, John Lewis, if you really want to watch it, you can watch it on TV, right? Amazon has Good Trouble, documentary about John Lewis's life. But John Lewis advocated for and helped to pass the Voting Rights Act and continued to be an advocate for that. Thinking about the efforts of John Lewis this morning has been on my mind. In addition, if you're, it's all about movies these days. If you're on Netflix, Crip Camp is the story of the emergence of the American Disabilities Act. And one person in particular, Judy Heumann, her role in that movie is phenomenal. And then, of course, she dedicated her life to bringing about the passing of that act as well. And then been a long-time advocate for those who are living alongside of certain disabilities and trying to be full participants in our social fabric. She is a great testimony to that journey as well. And both of these people brought sort of a fortitude, a vision, and sacrificed so much to pour all of their energy and efforts into helping create our human context, the place in which we find ourselves, to be more open and inclusive and connected to a diverse expression of lives. And they deserve such credit for all that they gave to make that possible. And at the same time, they were, each of them, incredibly clear that the legislation passed alone does not have the capacity to transform the hearts and minds of the human family, right? That we will always struggle and continue to struggle with what the Voting Rights Act really means for us, as we've seen the Supreme Court chip away at the open intentionality of ensuring that everybody has a way to participate in our voting process. And of course, John Lewis continued to advocate for voting rights his whole life, knowing that we have to continue to beat at that wall of opportunity for everyone. And the same with Judy Heumann. Judy knew that just the American Disabilities Act was almost like a first step in helping us change the way in which we think about persons with disabilities, and that has to be an ongoing effort. So both, gave their lives towards these kind of causes and advocated that all of us must continue to live into those realities so that there might be more freedoms and more justice for a broader swath of the human family. Both of those people, this week in particular, have been on my mind and maybe on yours as you maybe mark those two anniversaries and, of course, honor the death of John Lewis. But they were playing around with the study that we've been doing in the Gospel of Mark. And Mark, as it attempted to tell the story of the person and the work of Jesus, the stories of both John and Judy, I think, connect deeply to the Markan version of the story of what Jesus was up to in his own context. And I think those coming together, those three kind of voices coming together for me this week has kind of raised up, what does it really mean for us to live as humans within the context of literally the gift of life that we find ourselves in our particular place, in our particular time, no matter where you're situated around the planet. And in some ways, I think the real heart of religion is this invitation simply to be a human being and what that means within your place and time. What does it really mean to be human? And the challenge of that alone could be the greatest spiritual journey of all. So I want to explore that a little bit today, and I think I want to explore it because in some ways all of us have kind of lost this connection to these patterns of piety that have been our Sunday morning experience, right? Where we come together and we repeat these same patterns over and over again, and that pattern has been disrupted. And we're all kind of thrust out of that kind of comfortable pattern of piety and are really asked to kind of rethink for the moment, what does religion really mean in my life? What does it really mean to be spiritual? Is it just this kind of comfortable pattern of a Sunday morning experience that I call church that is my religious experience and expression? Or could there be some other alternatives? And so today I'm going to invite you into the kind of the cocoon of a new idea and see if it might help you reflect on that question. Because really my role is just to be like a catalyst of reflection, for those of you who are willing to hang out here for 30 minutes and kind of provide material that might be a cocoon experience for you, so that you might find your way into some emerging spirituality for our time or emerging religious experience in our time for you, and for the context in which you find yourself. So today, to get situated, I don't know if you can see this because it's kind of dark in here because I had to close everything up because of the leaf blower. But I lit a candle today and I floated it in water. And today, as we kind of take a deep breath and get centered, I want you to, if you've got a candle that you've lit, whether you have the time to kind of use a bowl of water and float it in the water, but I want you to think about your life held within the context that is, your everyday world, right? The world that holds you. That could be vocation, neighborhood. It could be all of your relationships. It could be the connection to planet or universe. Try to remind yourself this morning as we center ourselves today that we are not isolated individuals, but we're always afloat, right, in this amazing gift of life that is the context in which we find ourselves throughout the unfolding evolution of the universe, right? This little slice of time, this little moment in space and time, right, is the moment in which we find ourselves. And for us as human beings, it's relatively short-lived in the context of the great span of time, but this is our current moment. Even the pandemic, right, is the context in which we find ourselves. And the question of how do I graciously float as a human being within that context is sort of the centering piece I'd like you to do today. All right? So just take a couple of deep breaths and rather than ground yourself into something that feels like it is stable, try to ground yourself into the beautiful and mysterious wealth of experiences and vibrant manifestations that is your current context, right? What holds you? And honor that for but a moment. Okay? So I too will take a couple of deep breaths as I center in on the candle this morning and invite you to do the same. And let's just be present together as we kind of give shape to the cocoon of a new idea. So breathe with me for a moment. Take a couple of deep breaths. And just feel your body and your soul in the midst of yet another week full of complexity and moments of reflection. Just feel yourself resting within the wide matrix of the context and culture, community that holds you. And as our bodies calm into this space, let's hold just a real depth of gratitude for not only the awareness of the many ways in which our lives are held within this great gift we call life, but the opportunity to be but one contributor to all of the wonder and beauty and mystery that sustains us all. And with that spirit, we gather this morning. So welcome. I wanted to start with a reading by John Lewis that comes from his last statement that he wrote. As you probably know, one of the last public appearances that he made before he was checked into the hospital was to visit the Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for him to observe the results of that, movement that is continuing to sit at the center of our cultural awareness even today. And that John Lewis would spend time allowing the vision of that plaza to be one of the last kind of visual moments he had of the movement that he had been a part of for most of his life. And he writes this: "You filled me with hope when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. You set aside race. You set aside class. You set aside age and language and nationality, and you demanded dignity and respect for all humanity. And that's why I had to visit the Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see that. I just had to feel that for myself. After many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. The truth is still marching on." Isn't that a great quote? I'll finish up today with a closing quote with him, but I did notice in John Lewis's language all those kind of subtle religious references, right? And that is no accident. John Lewis started out thinking he was going to be a preacher, started out preaching to the chickens on his sharecropping farm back in the day. Deeply religious, I think he probably understood the essence of the religious call and manifested it in his work to seek greater human justice for us all, particularly through the challenge and the opportunity that the capacity to vote brings to the human experience. I think it's powerful that John Lewis gave his life to that. And in some ways, I think it's reflective of kind of the way in which Mark, in particular, is the earliest of the Gospels, describes for us the life and work of Jesus. And I want to move into that quickly. Now I realize I've been chatting for 20 minutes already. I'm like, get on with it, Dan. Let me give you a little personal story. I had one of these moments reading Mark's Gospel early on in seminary back in the day, years ago. When I was struggling as a clergy person with sort of the required metaphysic that went along with accepting the life of Jesus as sort of my central focus. And that metaphysic was birthed in the creeds, right? That Jesus somehow was not just a human being, but was, you've said it in the creeds, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, from whom all things were made. You have this energy in Christianity that requires you to put Jesus inside of this larger metaphysical view of the world. And I was struggling with, is that the correct metaphysic, or worldview that can hold Jesus for today? When in fact that metaphysic is inherited from a worldview that is so thousands of years old that we've moved beyond, right? We see the world, our worldview is different. So what is the voice of Jesus inside the worldview that we have for our time? And I was really struggling with that, and to the point where I thought, I'm not sure I can keep this up if I have to both pay attention to the life and teachings of Jesus, and I have to advocate for that worldview that in a sense creates Jesus as some sort of a divine figure that both drops into our world from another world, and then at the end of the Gospels is ascended back into the heavens, right? That idea was that metaphysic was just too much for me to bear. And it got me in a lot of trouble, but it also sent me down a path to dig more deeply into, is there a more human face to Jesus? And I'll never forget when I stumbled into, and it's available to all folks, but I was studying the book of Mark at the time in seminary, and I came to stumble into this term that Jesus used over and over again, not only in Mark's gospel, which was the earliest one, but you find it in the other gospels as well. 80 times when Jesus refers to himself, he refers to himself as the Son of Man. Other people, when they try to put a label on Jesus, will say, you are the Son of God, right? They're always putting that phrase on him. But he chooses in the bulk of the gospel narratives, particularly Mark's gospel, to refer to himself as a Son of Man. And what is a Son of Man? What does that really mean? Well, the Son of Man really means the human one. The human one. In many ways, Jesus continues to frame himself as simply a human being. And we hear it embedded in our theology too, Son of Man and Son of God. We try to put the two together, but I think at its origins, the opportunity to think of Jesus as a manifestation or a vision of what it really means to be human can kind of help us hang on to the way in which he lived his life in a way that we can apply to our context without the requirement of inheriting this kind of huge metaphysical construct that we've then insulated Jesus with, elevated him to the point by the time we get to John's gospel, right? Jesus is really elevated to what they call a high Christology. We've lifted Jesus up beyond the capacity of any human being. and we simply spend our time glorifying him and keeping him on that pedestal rather than realizing that the life and teachings of Jesus is a life partner to you and I to help us understand what it really means to be human within any context, time, or place that we find ourselves. And when I stumbled into that idea of Jesus as the Son of Man or the human one, I began to wonder what would it look like? What would it look like for religion to simply be the invitation to be truly human? In the study we're doing on the Gospel of Mark currently on Wednesdays at 11:30, I'm challenging the people who are showing up for that to think about reading Mark's Gospel not as a story about Jesus, not being Jesus-centric in the understanding of that story, but rather to think about it as a full story of an invitation into what it means to be human. Right? Can you see that it's really like everyone's story, and that Jesus in that story becomes, if you will, the paradigm for what it means to be a human being. And the human being narrative that you're reading in Mark's Gospel is the life of Jesus in his context, but you can clearly apply it to any context. In some ways, it's like lowering the bar a little bit on who we think Jesus is, lowering the bar to the point where, look, you get to grab the bar, and like a baton, you get to carry it through the race of life that you get to run, right? This is what it is. I'm going to describe this to you, and then I'm going to hand it to you, and then you're going to carry it into your context, into your place and time. So what would Christianity look like if it was sort of grounded in this idea of the human one? And what I think happens when you think of it that way, like how do you live your life within your context? Like we started off with this meditation, right? That our human vocation is not about the preservation of each of us as an individual, right? Whether that be your spiritual personal preservation, or your preserving your particular race, or your economic status. It's not about somehow self-preservation, but your whatever giftedness you have, your giftedness is your capacity to enhance or lean into this collective gift of life. But that's really what Jesus seemed to be doing in his context, right? He was giving himself for the sake of world, right? And we use that language about him all the time. How do you give yourself for the sake of world? And world can only be the context in which you find yourself in, right? It is your the milieu in which you operate. As you give yourself to world, that's what it means to be truly human. And in some ways, this capacity to live into this collective gift is always, if you are to pay attention to the way in which I think Jesus constructed life in his time as a model of what it means to be human, right? It kind of mirrors that old spiritual song that it really means to lift every voice. What does it mean to lift every voice collectively and sing, to sing a song of justice and harmony till earth and heaven ring with those harmonies of liberty that are available to all, right? It is this, that's why we have open table, this idea of invitation and openness to make sure that everyone finds their voice, everyone has place within this collective that we share as human beings, within this gift of life. So for me, it allows me then to see the life and work of Jesus, and to say, this is a call a call to me to truly be human and to use my moment in time as a way to lean into an invitation to freedom and justice for all who find themselves floating in this gift of life. And I would say that's human and non-human together. That feels like a worthy challenge. I find it interesting that any of the voices who challenge us to live like that are often silenced throughout history. I don't know why we reject them as human people, right? The prophets are struck down, voices like Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., whoever. We either get rid of them or we tend to elevate them so that they exist only in some sort of abstract, sometimes heavenly sphere, right? We either put them up so high that they're unattainable or we put them in the grave. But we don't, I don't know why we don't find the middle ground of saying these are the voices that are calling us to what it means to be a human being in our time or in our place, right? I don't know why we do that. So we either get rid of them, silence them, or we elevate them beyond our reach. And I think both are inappropriate responses, right? Dangerous responses to the call to be human. When we think of what it might look like if religion is truly just daring to be human within your time and place, what might that look like? And that's why I started off with John Lewis and Judy Heumann. John Lewis, who understood that the best nonviolent tool for social change is your capacity to vote. And through giving of himself, through the big bloody Sunday experience, which is another kind of religious reference in Alabama, that experience brings about, I think a few months later, the signing of the Voting Rights Act. That John Lewis saw that that for him, in his time and place, the one thing that he could lean into for a lifetime was giving people the access to vote. Everyone this access to vote. That was a tool for social transformation for good. That, to me, is the deepest spiritual journey one person can take. He, too, is a model for what it means to be deeply religious, to tether oneself or yoke oneself, which is the definition of religion, to the gracious gift of life. That's an example of what that is like. Judy Heumann, the same way. Judy Heumann, who at 18 months old contracted polio, wasn't allowed to go to school because she was in a wheelchair as a young girl, worked hard and hard and hard to educate herself with her parents advocating for her, got a degree so that she could be a teacher, and then applied for a teaching position in New York. And in New York, they told her, no, you can't be a teacher in the school system because you're in a wheelchair and you're going to be an impediment. If there's a fire, you're not going to be able to get out of the building. And she went to court, sued them, won that lawsuit, and then became this advocate and the first teacher in a wheelchair in New York City. Her great story you can just watch on Netflix, right? Crip Camp. And of course, she's been a lifelong advocate in that whole field for how it's not that the disability is the challenge. It is a challenge, but it's made more complicated because the society hasn't created ways in which folks can live to their full potential, right? Judy and John both, I think, are reminders of what it looks like when you think about the core religious calling is simply to be a human being in the way in which they construct it, a human being that understands their place in the universe, in the context that holds them, and advocates for greater freedoms and justices for the entire system, not just self-preservation. Each gave their life for that cause. What does it look like for you? What does it look like for you? I frankly, I don't have an end to this discussion this morning. As I've been thinking about it, I kind of ran out of time, right? I don't know what the end is. I will tell you that I was over to a little cocktail hour party not too long ago, and one of the people in that cocktail party was sharing that at work, when they think about their vocation, they worked in an industry that produced a particular product. I tend to like that product. I think it's a pretty cool product, and I thought that's why the person was doing the job, because they got to make that product, right? So I'm like, oh, that's awesome. He goes, no, it's not really about, my job really isn't about the product. It's really about creating a place for the people in that company. I'm more focused in on the people's experience of being a part of the company, not the product, really. I thought, wow, what an interesting way to think about it. It reminded me of that person is bringing to their job, to their context, this desire to create opportunity and possibility for the little community that is a part of that company. And that is their focus, right? And I thought to myself, that's just exactly like what I think is going on in these texts. What's your context? Are you a teacher, a lawyer? Are you in construction? Are you an artist? Whatever your context is, how do you engage that context in a way that brings full expression to what it means to be human for our time? Ooh, that feels like a religious journey to me. So let me close. As you think about that, reflect on it, maybe talk to your friends and neighbors about it from a distance, with a closing piece by John Lewis for today. John writes, "In my life, I've done all that I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence is the most excellent way. And now it's your turn to let freedom ring." So when the historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, and these are my closing words for you today, they're John's closing words to you. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Isn't that beautiful? Listen to the way in which John constructs what I think is spiritual language into just common language. I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the spirit of the power of everlasting love be your guide. Try to be human, won't you? All right. Enough for today. Thanks for chilling out today. Great to be with you, of course. A quick shout out to those of you who last week did the arts and crafts project, particularly Sheila and Ellen. Thanks for sending your photos of your passageway into daily life, now framed with the arch of wisdom that you're gleaning as you go through this time of sheltering in place and thinking about the world in which we live, and then articulating that either artistically or through words. Putting that on the on the frame of your doorway, so that as you exit each day, that wisdom kind of goes with you. It's a fun project. Lori and I have been enjoying it. I would encourage you to do it too. I'm going to try to send out packets to our kids too as they get ready to start school, because I think this is going to be a challenging year for both teachers and students. How can they kind of have some experience, a daily experience at home, where they're thinking about this kind of opportunity that they're in, what they're learning, and how they can bring their own little wisdom into the world. So we'll do that for kids in the next week or so. You should see that showing up by the end of the week. If you have kids at home, we'll try to get you a little kit to work on that project as well. And then next week, just a reminder that we're no longer hosting this on my personal Facebook page. I don't know what to do with my Facebook page, because a lot of you have connected to it to do this together. But it'll be on the church one. So the best way to do it is to go next Sunday, is to go probably to the church website, look at the banner, and the banner will have the updated link. But so will all of our communication. So the link to the Facebook Live will change next week, and then that'll be fixed. We won't change after that, because that'll be the church's Facebook page that we'll be using to promote this and some of the other work that we're doing. So thank goodness we finally figured that out, but it took some time. So, and then lastly, Martin has a piece which I think is appropriate for today that I've posted on this Facebook feed. Just a closer walk with thee. How do we walk in world holding the values and the perspectives that clearly were a part of Jesus' life, right? And this capacity to embrace those in his social fabric that were marginalized, the capacity to see beyond religious distinction, economic distinction, distinctions of health, race. I mean, Jesus was clearly manifesting a model for what it means to be human in his time. Can you walk that walk? Can you take a couple of steps into that kind of vibrancy of life and imagine that that is your religious journey, the way in which you bind yourself to the gift that holds us all? All right. Amen for this week. I'll see you next week on a new Facebook page. Have a week. We continue to deal with the challenges that are in front of us. Stay healthy. Know that not only do I care about you, but I know that this community cares for one another. Feel that care as a partner with you as you journey deep into the gift that holds us all. Be well.